bunch of humans. It's a whole bunch of vampires and one human. So it's the first of the apocalyptic monster narratives in a lot of ways, and it's no surprise that it came out in the height of the Cold War. So Romero wanted to try this out. I want to make a movie like that, about some people trapped in a house being attacked from the outside. That's basically what happens in I Am Legend. And he drew from lots of inspirations. He was really excited by the idea of Invasion of the Body Snatchers and how, oh, you don't know who the bad guys are. They look like us. You know, who's good, who's evil. He liked The Birds, this idea of being trapped in the house and having to board up the doors and windows and being attacked from the outside. He liked the early zombie movies to a certain extent. He also liked the idea of the ghoul, which comes out of an Arabian mythological tradition. Ghouls are demons that feast on dead flesh. They go dig up bodies in the cemetery. And so he kind of took that idea of eating flesh, drinking blood, communicability, not knowing who's good and who's bad, hiding in a house. He put all this stuff together, and he made this really low-budget movie that he then failed to adequately copyright, which was good and bad for George. Because on the one hand, George made no money off the movie because people could exhibit it for free. But on the other hand, because it was free, everybody showed it. And he became hugely famous really quickly because free movie. We get that today with free music releases and self-published books and all that kind of stuff. He doesn't even talk about zombies though, because he wasn't making a zombie movie. He calls them ghouls, and they are uncanny for a number of reasons. They're dead, but they're living. I kind of side with him on this. I don't call zombies undead. I reserve undead for stuff like vampires who are dead but alive. I don't think that zombies are really very alive. At least they didn't used to be, because they didn't used to talk. Now they talk. I'd rather they didn't talk. They're monsters, but they're monsters that used to be members of your family. That's problematic. And they're familiar and unfamiliar. So let's kind of look at this, the famous kind of opening scene. Because zombies existed prior to 1968, but they're not the zombies we know today. The pre-68 zombies are inspired more by voodoo culture and are more the idea of being possessed or mesmerized or controlled by somebody else. They're more like puppets. Sometimes they're aliens, sometimes they're voodoo priests. But this is the scene that really set things up.
What happened to the one from last year? Each year we spend good money on these things.
So we're in a cemetery, that's important.
Well, the flowers died.
These two bickering siblings have come out to put a wreath on their father's
little spit and polish to
headstone.
clean this up.
They don't get along too well.
Wonder how many times we bought the same one.
But you notice how a cemetery is kind of uncanny? You're familiar with it, but it's kind of creepy. Headstones are kind of that way.
Hey, come on, Barb. Church was this morning, huh?
Watch for the zombie. Keep your eyes open. So, it's a dude walking through the cemetery. Big deal. Dudes walk through the cemetery all the time. Maybe not in Davis, but maybe in another town.
Hey, I mean praying's for church, huh? Come on.
I haven't seen you in church lately.
And one of the key things about this, and one of the reasons why I'm running it out, is it's slow. And it's supposed to be slow.
Do you remember one time when
you got to imagine you're an audience that doesn't know what a zombie is.
It was from right over there. I jumped out.
You're watching this movie at a midnight screening or on TV one night, and you're like,
"Boy, you'll be damned to hell."
Oh, look at this funny.
Remember that? Right over there. Well, you used to really be scared here.
Johnny.
You're still afraid.
Stop it now, I mean it.
Here's the famous line.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Stop it. You're ignorant.
They're coming for you, Barbara.
See, he's right there.
Stop it. You're acting
They don't
like
even
Johnny.
know, because we don't know what a zombie is.
Look, there comes one of them now.
Okay, familiar.
He'll hear you.
Here he comes now. I'm getting out of it.
Johnny.
No problem. We're still good, right? We're good. Oh, not good. It's really not good now. so that's the beginning. That's kind of where this all really started. Familiar, unfamiliar. He's alive, but he's not alive. And of course, in that moment, we don't know he's dead. That kind of develops as the movie progresses. But then we get this group. This is a little bit later in the film. So just in case you were not clear on what was going on, he shows you this scene. Familiar and unfamiliar. Now, the nudity is actually important here. Somebody naked, that's all right. That's familiar, I guess. Well, it depends on who you are. Naked people walking in your front lawn at night. That's a little weird. People eating bugs off of trees. That's not right. So this freaks us out a little bit. Now, your generation is a little bit too jaded because you've seen too much of this imagery. But for an audience that's never seen this before, they're going, what is this? This is not normal. Because the vampires in the Vincent Price version of I Am Legend, Last Man on Earth, they act more normal. They come up and they have the stiff arms and they try to break down the door. But these guys, what's wrong with these guys? Well, here's what's going on. It's about the return of the repressed. Bum, bum, bum. This is where the psychoanalysis kind of stuff comes in. So Freud talks about this a little bit in The Ego and the Id, which you're probably a little bit familiar with, where he talks about the different levels of the mind and how things work together. So he says, the state in which the ideas existed before, being made conscious, is called by us repression, and we assert that the force which instituted the repression and maintains it is perceived as resistance during the work of analysis. Blech. Freud is usually pretty easy to understand. That's a little bit dense. But what he's basically saying is the things that we don't want to talk about when we're trying to analyze them, we repress them, we hide them, we put them away. We don't want them to come out. So the unconscious, he calls it, there's kind of a dual unconscious that he talks about. But this part of the unconscious is the one which is repressed and which is not in itself and without more ado capable of becoming conscious. So the whole idea of Freudian psychoanalysis is you have something upsetting in your brain and you don't want to deal with it and you actually can't deal with it on your own. So the idea is you need a therapist to help you talk about it, to talk through it, to figure out what's going on, to bring that stuff to the surface with the assistance of someone else's work. That's why you talk through these things. Well, the uncanny is a way to kind of trigger that moment. Trigger that moment, like we were talking about the scent. Sometimes you can smell something and it just kind of brings it back. I'm probably talking to the wrong generation here, but there's a great MASH episode about this. You wouldn't know anything about MASH. But there's an episode where Hawkeye has a repressed trauma that comes out when he smells musty, rotten clothing. And it's a really pretty good episode on how Freudian psychoanalysis works. He also talks about the return of the repressed in the uncanny. Let's see if this is easier to understand. Every affect arising from an emotional impulse is converted into fear by being repressed. It follows that among those things that are felt to be frightening, there must be one group in which it can be shown that the frightening element is something that has been repressed and now returns. So if you've repressed something, so if you were a child lying in your crib and a spider fell on your face and crawled across your face, then when you get older, you don't remember it. But you're really afraid of spiders. And you don't know why you're afraid of spiders. That's because the thing that is coming out is this fear. The repression, your confrontation with that thing which you've repressed makes you fearful, and you don't know why. But every time you see a spider, that really childhood memory, that memory you had as a baby comes back. And you feel the same emotions, but you have nothing directly to connect it to. So this can happen with lots of different things. There's lots of things that you may be repressing, that you may be afraid of, and they just kind of come out in really unexpected moments. So I don't know at what point in my childhood I was attacked by a scorpion, but I don't like them. I know that much. So here's some other things he says. We can understand why German usage allows the familiar to switch to its opposite, the uncanny, the unfamiliar. For this uncanny element is actually nothing new or strange, but something that was long familiar to the psyche and was estranged from it only through being repressed. So this is key. Things that are uncanny are only uncanny in their unfamiliarity because they're not unfamiliar. They're things that are very familiar, which is why they're both at the same time. Now at this point, you're either going to go, I get it, or you're going to go, I don't know what you're talking about. This still makes no sense. So the thing is, you think it's weird, but the main reason you think it's weird is because it isn't weird. So when you see, like The Blob's a good example of this old movie. You know, The Blob isn't really scary because it's like, it's a blob. I'm not scared by that. It doesn't trigger anything to me. It's not familiar on any level. But when they're the more humanoid aliens, like in the Signs, Shyamalan movie, they're creepy because they're familiar, but they're unfamiliar. They're both simultaneous. That's what's really cool. In hardly any other sphere has our thinking and feeling changed so little since primitive time as in our relation to death. So Freud's going to say the thing that we're afraid of most is death, but it's the thing that's actually most familiar to us because we're mortal. When you are born, you begin to die. That's your cheerful thought of the week. You're all dying. And so on some level, we all know this. We all know we're going to die, but we don't want to think about it. We certainly don't want to talk about it. I mean, is this country even remotely afraid of Ebola right now? Is there any fear at all? My administrative assistant is going to cancel her trip to New York that she's planned for 6 months because she's going to get Ebola. Well, why is she so afraid of Ebola? Because she knows it can kill you. It's familiar. It's unfamiliar. So let's look about on the return of the repressed. Romero literalizes this. Now, before we give too much credit to him, he steals all this from Last Man on Earth. There is nothing original. You know you're Joseph Campbell, right? It's all recycled. So here's later in the movie. This is kind of the climax. The zombies are breaking through the windows. We've all seen this before. There's the guy from the cemetery. That's not the key return. There it is. Who is that? It's her brother. Her brother's come back. We'll let it go. Goodbye, Barbara. So here's the thing. What is she repressing? She's repressing the fact that she and her brother don't get along, that she resents her brother, that he's mean to her, that he's picked on her as a child. They have this antagonistic relationship, and once a year they have to drive out to the middle of nowhere and put the wreath on Dad's grave, and he belittles her and teases her and makes fun of her and reminds her of when she was a child. So her brother has all these fears tied up in him. So in a psychoanalytic level, hey, my brother makes me upset, but I don't know why. That's an unfamiliar emotion. Oh, no, it's not. It's unfamiliar because it's so familiar. Because I've been treated that way by him my whole life, which is why it makes me feel weird. So Romero says, well, I'll make him actually come grab you and eat you. So it's a literalization of that fear. The fear that the brother is going to turn on the sister, consume the sister. On the one hand, she's afraid that his personality is going to overtake her own, so he's going to consume her. He's going to eat her. Fratricide. Well, that one was pretty shocking. This is what got... by the way, it's important to notice, or to note, Night of the Living Dead was released in the gap between the production code and the MPAA. So Romero just kind of did whatever the hell he wanted. So we get this really famous scene of a mother, a father, and a daughter. Oh, she's eating Dad. The weirdest electric complex of all time. What's the greatest fear a parent can have for their child? That the child will die. What's maybe a repressed fear? That she's going to kill you. This is a shout out to the birds, by the way, the sound effects. Well, just let this play. It's Halloween week. When was the last time you saw a mother troweled to death by her daughter? But it's a little upsetting. It's upsetting because we don't really want to see someone murdered with a garden trowel. We really don't want to see a little girl murder someone with a garden trowel. And we really, really don't want to see a little girl murder her mother with a garden trowel. But are there stories from antiquity and mythology and the Greeks about children killing their parents? Yeah, I mean, that's a really deep-seated fear. I mean, on the one hand, we want our children to grow up and become great and become better, but we don't want them to supplant us. And Freud loved this stuff, right? It's the whole Oedipal complex. You don't want the son to rise up and kill the father and marry the mother, but Freud says that's what we all secretly want to do, which is why everyone hates Freud. It's a little weird. But this is kind of, again, a literalization of those fears. So it's fearful, again, not because it's weird, but because it's not weird. And the fact that it's not weird makes it really weird. One more thing, just to kind of think about this, a couple of these. The uncanny, we've been talking about the uncanny primarily about people or people analogs, so monsters that look human. And that's why I think that the zombie is more uncanny than the vampire, because it looks more human. And as you get further and further away, to the vampire, to the werewolf, to the alien, to the blob. You know, if you get too unfamiliar, it ceases to be uncanny. So it's got to be kind of close. It doesn't just have to be people. It can be animals, but it doesn't have to be animals. It can also be things or objects like the dolls, but it can also be locations. And so one of the things that Night of the Living Dead did, riffing off of the birds, riffing off of I Am Legend, is taking the home. And this is one of the reasons why I wrote about this. It's literally timeless. It's the home. It's almost as if Romero read the essay, but I don't know if he did. So the home is supposed to be comforting and familiar and warm and loving, and Ben is going to have to change it to make it something different. He's going to have to make the home a fortress. He's going to have to barricade it. He's going to have to turn this chair. We all know what a chair is, but he's going to light it on fire, so it becomes some kind of weird chair bomb. I believe this was invented by fraternities. Chair on fire. He's going to turn this table leg into a torch. He's going to turn the curtains into the flammable part of the torch. So notice how he's taking everything that is familiar and turning it into something unfamiliar. But is a torch unfamiliar? If anything, a torch is more familiar than a flashlight or electric lighting of any kind. A burning chair is maybe more familiar than a chair. Because Freud's going to say this stuff all goes back to kind of the primitive. By the way, this is completely ineffectual. But he's going to put it out there anyway. Notice there's a little echoes of Frankenstein in this. Fire mad.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've just received word.
This goes on for some time. But he's going to board everything up.
With the sudden epidemic of murder which has seized the eastern third of the state.
It's almost done. So he's going to board up the doors and the windows. But of course, what were homes originally? Places to hide. Places to be safe, places where you would close yourself in from the elements, to protect yourselves from the wild animals, to protect yourselves from the invading horde of other people. Okay, so it's like this thing is weird, but it's not weird. All right, I'm going to skip this one. It's 28 days later. You should go see it tonight. All right. This is my anticlimactic climax. So basically, this is what's going on. And so this was kind of the germ that got this book written. The idea that these uncanny things are inherently part of a Gothic tradition. Because the uncanny predates Freud. We know that. He didn't invent anything. Freud noticed stuff. He noticed stuff that was already happening. And he talked about it. And he theorized it. And he put it together. So when I noticed a lot of this stuff was going on in Night of the Living Dead, I wanted to see if it happens more broadly. And I was able to find uncanny elements present in the earlier voodoo zombie films. I was able to find different uncanny elements in the later zombie films. This film, Night of the Living Dead, is mostly about the home. Dawn of the Dead is about the mall, and it's about consumer culture, and it's about the drive to shop that is so ingrained in us that we do it even after we die. And there's some footage from Dawn of the Dead that is very, very similar to Black Friday footage today. Okay, so it's familiar, it's unfamiliar. Oh, nope, it is familiar. It's uncanny. Day of the Dead is about the Cold War. Land of the Dead is about both terrorism and immigration. 28 Days Later, we skipped over it, but it's about terrorism. It's also about infection, infectious diseases. It crops up even in the comedies like Shaun of the Dead. Shaun of the Dead is playing with the idea of a disconnected culture, the fact that it doesn't matter if we become zombies because we already are. If a zombie outbreak happened on this campus, how long would it take for you to notice? That's one of the questions of that film. Diary of the Dead, also by Romero, is about social media and how social media is turning us into a zombie culture. And now the metaphor has exploded, and you can find it in almost any discipline. You can find it almost anywhere. People talk about zombie banks or zombie computers or zombie star systems because it's a metaphor that helps us to understand this principle of the uncanny and what it is that tells us. It tells us what we're trying to forget but shouldn't. It's helping us remember the thing we stopped remembering, and once we start remembering it, we'll be a lot healthier. Anyway, if anybody wants to contact me, there's all my stuff. Thanks. Let's open it for questions.
Before I help field some questions, I'd just like to make some announcements before I forget, and in case anybody has to leave. The first one is that tomorrow morning, in room 228 of Voorhees, Dr. Bishop's going to do a seminar, actually specifically on the impact of 9/11 on the zombie culture and the zombie renaissance. So that's going to be from 10 to 11 a.m. in 228 Voorhees. And the second announcement I want to make is that immediately following the talk and the question and answer period, we're going to be bringing Dr. Bishop to Delta Venus on 2nd and A to feed him. And also so that if you want to interact with him or ask him any questions one-on-one in a smaller setting, you're welcome to join us there. We'll be there for a while having dinner. Who has a question?
Anything goes. I will be completely honest.
Go ahead.
I have a question. So have zombie movies always been also apocalypse movies, or is that a more recent thing? Because now it seems like we have all these apocalypse movies and we have zombie movies, and then every zombie movie is a zombie apocalypse movie. So
Yeah.
what the origins of that?
Zombie is not a genre. Zombie is kind of an additive. And you're right. The primary place you find zombies is in apocalypse. But pre-68 it wasn't. So pre-68 it was more this idea of zombies as slaves, zombies as forced labor, zombies as kidnapped victims. And then it's really because of that I Am Legend influence, which was apocalyptic, because it was, the Cold War, we're all going to die. Because I Am Legend is about a global vampire outbreak that occurs because of nuclear warfare. And so you start getting these kind of scenarios. Now part of that is just mathematics. If you have a monster and every time they kill one of us, they get another one, it's just a matter of numbers. At some point, they're going to win. And so now the zombie is really closely aligned with the apocalypse or the post-apocalypse. Although there are some narratives that take place post-zombie apocalypse. One of the best ones is Fido, which is a comedy, but it's a satirical comedy, and it takes place in a world that has survived the apocalypse and come back from it. But yeah, mostly I think it's just because of the horror nature of the zombie that it lends itself very much to apocalyptic narrative. And of course we've got apocalypse on the brain again. We had Y2K, and then we had 2012. I'm very disappointed, by the way. So yeah, I mean we're still very much in that mode.
So in Night of the Living Dead, we talked a lot about how gender is sort of subtly into that. And do you think that plays towards like second wave feminism or anything like that at the time?
Yeah, Night of the Living Dead is a little bit of a problematic text because the women in the narrative are so subordinated to the will of the men. And it was, but most people focus on the racial aspect because Romero cast the best person he could find to play Ben, and he just happened to be black. But part of the script was about this protagonist kind of being a jerk to Barbara, yelling at her, telling her to stop being so hysterical, applying that great old sexist cure for hysteria, right? But then when he shot it, I don't think he really cared or realized it, but he had a black man slapping a white woman on film in '68. And so it was a little sensitive. And Helen, of course, there at the end. is abused by her husband. She's yelled at by for the whole movie. Then her daughter kills her. So it's a problematic text when it comes to feminist reading because the women are pretty much zombified already. Barbara spends most of the film catatonic. She can't really function or act on her own. So there's a little bit of a subtext that the women of this era are zombies, and so when they're plagued by zombies, they're almost always killed by male zombies, and all that kind of stuff's going on. It's important to recognize that when Tom Savini remade the film in the 80s, Barbara doesn't die. Barbara is the protagonist. And that's the film that's really quite interesting to see how in 20 years, the whole narrative of Night of the Living Dead shifted and was kind of reclaimed for women. And it's a much more interesting feminist text, although the zombie symbolism is much more heavy-handed. But there's a lot going on, and a lot of that goes back to the early films, because the early films were almost always about a white woman being turned into a zombie by a black man. And so the implication, this is production code implication, was sex slave. So it was really problematic and pretty racist at the same time. So a lot of stuff is going on. I don't do a strict feminist reading of it though myself, but others have.
What is your favorite out of all the ones you watch?
I will tell you, but I first have to say, I was not a huge fan of zombie movies. When I went to get my dissertation, I got some really good advice. They said, don't write about something you love, and don't write about something you hate. Because if you hate it, you'll never get through it. And if you love it, you'll hate it before you're done. So I picked something I was really neutral about. I actually like vampires a lot more. I like vampire narratives quite a bit. And the zombie didn't mean much to me, so I kind of got into it. And now, I'm a little tired, just because it's kind of like, I liked zombies before you guys liked zombies. So there's a little bit of a hipster scholarship going on. But to answer your main question, Dawn of the Dead, 1978 is my favorite zombie movie. I think that was really Romero at his best. It's a really complex and sophisticated text. There's a lot of good filmmaking involved. Tom Savini worked on that one, and he had just gotten back from Vietnam as a photographer, so he was kind of well versed in human anatomy and violence, and so it really works on a lot of levels. As far as the kind of zombie renaissance films go, I am a very big fan of Shaun of the Dead, because Shaun of the Dead works as a comedy, but it's also a really horrifying horror film. I mean, it's really upsetting and violent and scary. And it does so many different things on so many different levels. It works really, really well. I think the best made zombie movie is 28 Days Later, and if you want to get online, you can have all kinds of fist fights about whether it is a zombie movie or not. I count it as a zombie movie, and I think it's really well done. It's pretty haunting.